Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of all of nature, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we embark on our second program of a larger 5-day presentation on reckoning with the wounds of race. We started yesterday commemorating the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, and we continue today with young Black voices, emerging voices in the U.S. community. Before we start, I want to also bring an update to everyone about Rick Buckley. This session today was session number 448 of Humanity Rising, and from the very first session, along with Georg Bach, Rick has been the technical support for Humanity Rising and much of what we do at Ubiquity University. And yesterday, he succumbed to a stroke very suddenly and without any warning, and missed our Humanity Rising session. So Georg at the last moment had to step in, and he did so flawlessly, as he always does. But Rick, as it turned out, is now in the hospital, and he's dealing with the aftermath of a stroke that apparently paralyzed the left side of his body and impaired his speech. So I just wanted to raise that to our entire global community today and solicit your prayers and your love and your strength to Rick as he is now in Kaiser Permanente Hospital in San Rafael, California, just north of San Francisco. So send the vibes, everyone. And maybe this is a good moment to just take a moment and let us just pause and close our eyes if we can and attune ourselves to our hearts. And for the next minute, as we just listen to our heartbeat, let us honor the fragility of life and the need, moment by moment, to love one another as best we can. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your prayers for Rick. Thank you for your love for Rick. You know, day by day, it's not possible to know what the future holds, and life happens in all kinds of ways. And whatever happens, it's so important that we just simply embody the light as we can and love as we can with every opportunity that's given to us. This week, we are contemplating the issue of how humanity reckons with race. One of the themes yesterday as we began our program was on how progress is often stultified, and you can take two steps forward, as we did in the United States after the Civil War and the various amendments and then Reconstruction, and then came the step backward with the Jim Crow, and then 100 years later with the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and all the people who stood tall, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and seeming progress forward. And then comes Donald Trump and the Republicans, and we're now making retrograde steps. And the contemplation was around the constant need for struggle to bend that arc of justice. And so today we want to hear from young people, how they're assimilating the history, how they're committing themselves to forward momentum in a very, very complex world where racial justice in the United States and in many parts of the world is not yet assured, but is essential for any kind of human equality and human abundance as we move toward the future. So in that spirit, I want to welcome back Dr. Ferguson, who's convened this program and has convened a number of programs. He needs no introduction. So Cuff, welcome back to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. First, let me also extend my heartfelt feelings toward Rick. He's been just such a soldier in the process of Humanity Rising. And I'm sure everybody who has been with this enterprise for this time know the kind of work that he's been doing behind the scenes. And often it's the behind the scenes people who don't necessarily get a lot of acknowledgement, but who are so important, you know, for making things happen. And so he's played that role excellently throughout all of these sessions. And I just wanted to extend my heart energy toward him and have the community here also to do that too, in terms of sending that kind of vibration forward in love.
Thank you, Cuff.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for session 2 of this experience having to do with humanity's reckoning with its race-linked wounds. And what we did yesterday was to try to introduce some voices that have been in the struggle, so to speak, for many, many years. And today, what we want to have you to have an experience with is those who are continuing the struggle for what it means to have equity, what it means to have a sense of collaboration, what it means to really engage in a process of unfolding so that humanity can indeed rise. And so what I want to do initially is to do if you will, to do a little short presentation about what we're actually dealing with when we're talking about the reckoning process. And then I want to bring in our younger voices to have a dialogue with them around what they see, what their truth is, and what their lived experiences are. So if you bear with me as I do a little share in the beginning to set the context, which will also be followed by a short video clip, again, trying to set the tone. So hopefully everybody can see that. And I wanted to simply talk very briefly about aspects of humanity's reckoning with its and our race-linked wounds. So one might ask the question, what are we being called to do at this moment? Martin Luther King talked about the urgency of now. And we are in that now space being called. And it is an inner call, as I understand it, to account for. That's reckoning is about accounting for. And consciously dealing with our race-linked actions committed in life, knowingly or unknowingly, which has resulted in psychic wounds at both individual and collective levels. And so what's really contained in that? What is the nature of humanity's race-linked wounds? Yesterday, we talked about going back to the original sin of the United States. But if you dig a little deeper, that wound goes beyond just the founding of the United States. When you look at it from a larger humanities perspective. And so that wound, as I've come to understand it, has to do with humanity's past and present inability to comprehend and appreciate, really appreciate perceived human distinctions and differences at individual and collective level. So we haven't been able to figure out how to really appreciate our differences and distinctions. And that's at a core of our psyche. And humanities, it also involves humanity's attempt to make meaning. We are meaning makers, to make meaning out of its awareness and experience with light and dark. In a previous session, I talked a little bit about that. Won't go into detail about that right now. But it's very much entrenched in the way in which that wound operationalizes itself. If you notice that most of the parts of humanity that often get oppressed are those who are darker complected, or we tend to think in terms of light and dark, and that those things that are dark have a negative connotation. And so we're trying to make meaning out of that experience of light and dark. And that's a part of that particular wound. And thirdly, there's kind of this mechanistic tendency to reduce people to objects and then to engage in fear. When you reduce people to objects, it means that you no longer see who they really are. So it engenders then fear of differences or the otherness, fear of intimacy or closeness, fear of the unknown, just the unfamiliar or new things, fear of vulnerability, death, and annihilation of our consciousness. All of that undergirds that wound at individual collective levels of humanity. So we're being called to try to deal with that. And more specifically, if you ask the question, what are we being called to reckon with regarding our race-linked wounds? These are the things that come to mind. Now, depending on your belief system, you may believe that we only have one life, or you may believe that we have many lifetimes. But we're being called to reckon with in this life or over many lifetimes. In what ways have we caused or allowed the race-linked wounds to fester? It's being called to reckon with that. We're also being called to reckon with in this life or over many lifetimes, again, depending on your belief systems? In what ways have you or we contributed to or hindered cooperation and balance and the creative tension for equity? What have we been doing to that? We've been called to reckon with those questions. When we don't grapple with these questions, and we haven't been as a human species, we get stuck. And we've been stuck for many years. We start playing games. And the three primary games that we tend to play have to do with security. Our sensory. Security asks the question, do I feel secure in the world or not? And then we have all of these games we play having to do with our sensory modalities. What are we doing with our five senses? Rather than celebrating all of the experiences that we have with our five senses, sometimes we've created these demarcations arbitrarily, and we rail against these things because of how we interpret things through our senses. And then the power, which is a big one, the power human race game, played out in so many different ways, having to do with feeling that one has to have power over in order to be happy in this world. And we play these games over and over and over and over and over and over again. And we're being called right now to say, wait a minute. We know how to do these games. It's time to play the games differently, anew. But then the question comes up, what basically perpetuates these human race games? Well, I want to suggest that there are three things that perpetuates them. One is our unexamined self-limiting beliefs. Beliefs structure our realities. We carry them around in our minds, but they structure our realities. And when we don't examine them, they continue to structure our realities. So there's a lot of self-limiting beliefs that simply people have not examined, both at an individual and a collective level. When they're not examined at a collective level, then we get things like systemic racism. The systems that are in place that are held together by beliefs, unexamined beliefs that people may carry around knowingly and unknowingly, consciously and sometimes unconsciously. But these beliefs also generate unexamined fear. And that serves to perpetuate these human race games. And how do they manifest themselves? They manifest themselves a lot with our projections, the projections of these unexamined fears onto the perceived other at both individual and collective levels. So what I wanted to do is I want to play for you a little video clip where hopefully you can experience or see how these unexamined self-limiting beliefs are being acted out in just a little encounter that takes place between a Black person and a white person. And interesting enough, both of them are impaired. And you can see how some of the unexamined beliefs, self-limiting beliefs, relate to issues having to do with security, sensory issues, and power dynamics, just in this little interchange. So I'm going to ask Georg if you can play that for us. I'm going to stop share here, and then we'll come back and introduce our panelists.
Look at this! Look at this! Get away from me! Get away from me! I said move back so that I can move out! I said move back so that I can get out!
Man, you better quit hollering at me.
Get away from me!
You better quit hollering at me, man. I'm 67 years old. I'm not the one.
I said get out so I can get out!
Hey, I lost my leg saving one of you people.
Call the
You
police!
better quit that shit.
Call the police on the phone now!
For what?
To get you off of me, you fucking idiot!
Because you went crazy. Make sure you get out.
I'm not crazy, you goddamn moron!
Because you went crazy.
Get me out of here!
Yeah, I'm not crazy.
Get me out of here!
Save for your people. That's how.
Get away from me! Get me out of here! Move it!
What's the problem?
Move it, you fucking idiot!
You the idiot.
Call the police
For what?
on the phone
For what?
now!
This is really crazy. Yeah. Man. What was you?
Come and assist. Come and assist me. I'm under attack and she won't call the police. I have asked repeatedly to call the police and she won't call the police.
I was gonna get you.
No, it's not your phone. Not on your phone. Because all you do is call your gangster
Hold
now.
up, I'm gonna call him too. They come get you. You lost your mind.
You trying to go to work?
Yeah,
Go to work?
yeah.
Man, come on, let's go. Let's see that good time. That's crazy, man. Hey, man, make sure it's a good movie, okay? My number, you can call and get my... Hey, why don't you let her off?
The ramp is down.
Hey, why don't you let her off?
The ramp is down. The ramp is still down.
Hey, you can go now. Hey, I got
He just cracking up.
I'm going too. Somebody could fuck crazy.
Huh?
I lost my sister. He's from 1920 years. That's what I say. I never heard of it.
Get away from me! Don't touch my thing! Get away from me! Get the hell away from me!
Oh, you better not, boy, you better get your, y'all better get this
Oh,
one.
you don't like black
I'm
people.
gonna
I see what it
hey.
is. You see what it is, I'm a man. You don't like black people.
You need to get her personal vehicle, her personal chauffeur. Okay.
You don't like black people.
That's
That's pathetic.
crazy. That's just stone crazy.
But take a moment to digest that. Security, sensory, power, projection, just in that interchange. All right, what I want to do is to introduce our panelists. So I'm going to ask our panelists to open up your video so we can introduce you, and then we can begin to enter into some kind of dialogue. Keisha may still. We've been having some technical problems with one of our panelists, Keisha Taylor. And I also should mention that one of our other panelists, Dr. Joseph Cooper, he actually has to teach a class. So he's off teaching a class at the moment, and he will be joining us around 11:30-ish. So just so you have a context of what's going to be happening in terms of our panel dynamics. So I just wanted to say a word or two about each of our panelists, and then we'll sort of get some discussion going. With us right now, and I'll introduce folks as I see them on screen here. We have two, well, we have Keisha Taylor, who you can't see right now, but Keisha, can we hear you, or are you muted? Can't even hear her at the moment. Well, we'll see if we can straighten out her technical issues, but she's been struggling with that this morning. Hopefully we will get it straightened out. But she is actually one of two students of mine in human services at the UMass Boston, and is in a course that I teach called Human Services Policy and Practice. She's again a human service major, and she minors in psychology. So I wanted to have her voice present to provide some perspective around what it really means to come to this country and to have a Black experience in this country. Then we have Kamaya Parkin. And Kamaya is actually also a student of mine, and has a number of roles on campus. She actually works closely with the Chancellor's office on campus and does a variety of other things. And she can add on to other things that she may want to add on to other things that she's been doing. But she brings together a lot of students. She's connected to a lot of the student organizations on campus, and it serves actually closely with the special assistant to the Chancellor on Black life. And we also have with us Nicholas Knight, who is a recent graduate of North Carolina A&T State University. And he has his bachelor's in political science and has been doing a lot of work having to do with social justice, community organizing, and civic engagement. He's currently involved with a number of different kind of projects trying to bring issues of equitable education and adequate resources to all people. And his work is grounded significantly in improving student achievement through meaningful engagements to shift the life outcomes of students within the communities that he serves. And again, each of them can say a little bit more about themselves and the nature of their work when we have our dialogue. I'm bringing them in, not necessarily to represent all of younger Black voices, but to represent their truth. So I'm asking them to talk about their truth from their perspective, and to do that in whatever way that feels comfortable to them as we move forward in the dialogue. So one of the things I wanted to start off, we started off with this little video. And I just wanted to get your reactions to it. What did you see? What did you experience as you were watching the video? So who would like to share their perspectives?
I can go.
Okay, Kamaya.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am extremely honored to be on this panel and to just kind of have a real and personal conversation about race and how it affects youth. Because one thing about me, I'm a champion for youth. And I'm gonna always go hard for my young people and me, myself, because I am still young. This video is very triggering, and I've seen it before. I've seen it before this panel today. It's very triggering to me just because I cannot imagine the stress of everyone in that situation. I did see in the comments, a lot of people are talking about mental illness, and mental illness is a real conversation that I feel like we also have to start reckoning with in the US and in the Black community. However, I don't want mental illness to be used as an excuse, because there is no excuse for her behavior. And oftentimes when we see videos like this, it's always, well, they're struggling, they have things going on at home, and it's all these other situations. But let the roles have been reversed and that man put his hands on her, the police would have been there already in the video. Much less calling the police, they would have already been at the door like, you need to get off the bus, putting their hands on him. She got up out of her chair and touched the equipment that belonged to the bus driver. And so oftentimes, especially one of the other roles that I serve as the president of the NAACP college chapter here. And one of the things that we often describe that as is white tears. Getting people to feel sorry for you, even though you are clearly the one who is doing the attacking, and victimizing yourself, even though you know that you are the person who's in the wrong. I could go on and on about that video, but I will give other people a chance to speak.
Thank you, Kamaya. Nick, do you have any reactions to the video?
Absolutely. There were a lot of things that came to mind when I was watching it. And that's, I'm glad Kamaya brought that up, like the piece about the triggering. That's the first thing that came to mind. I think for Black folks who navigate this world, like seeing those things is just a reminder of, like, you know, maybe your own life experience or like life experiences of those who came before you that run parallel or just reflect those experiences. So also, yes, thank you for having me. I'm Nick. I always tell people my name is Nicholas Knight, or you can call me Nick at Night to help you remember it. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm grateful to Dr. Ferguson for inviting me. There were some of the things that I was thinking about, and I also looked at the chat and saw comments about mental illness. But one of the things that I kept coming back to was this conversation about power. I think is really important to lift up. One thing that kept echoing when she was speaking was she kept repeating, call the police, call the police, call the police. And then there was some profanity in there as well. But when I kept hearing call the police, I kept thinking about the very intent to harm with that statement. Historically, thinking about what the police has, the relationship the police have had with Black people historically, there are theories about, the police starting off as slave patrols, initially just starting off to catch slaves or runaway slaves and bring them back to masters. And then thinking about how, like, over time during the civil rights movement, during every single period of US history, there has been police, there has been Black people, and through that, there has been violence and harm. And so it sounded to me like, I heard call the police, but I kept translating call the lynch mob. And they were like, it was an actual intent to, like, I want this person's life to be taken. And that's something to bring up, like, one, like the intent to harm that was behind it. And then two, the sense of entitlement that was behind that. Not only do I want this person's life to be harmed, but I want this person's life to be harmed because I'm entitled to that. And I think that, like, these are one of the ways that, like, identity and privilege, like, shapes, how you navigate this world, and what then becomes violent. And one thing that I have been thinking about for weeks is, like, the conversation around violence is always centering, like, certain groups of people. And when I say that, I mean that, like, these groups of people get to define what violence is. In this video, the lady was calling him a murderer and saying that he was hurting her and all of these things. We were watching the video, none of this was happening. However, like, whose voice gets centered in most spaces, and especially, like, the context of the United States, whose voice is being centered, and who gets to define what violence is, and what are we doing to redefine what it means, what harm actually is. How are we naming it? And like, how are we thinking critically about these systems and how they show up in our individual behaviors, but also show up in a structural level?
Thank you, Nick. Kamaya, I'm sorry. Yeah, Keisha, do we have you here? You're muted.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Everyone, it's a pleasure to be able to share my views. When I watched the video, there were so many things that jumped out at me. I'm not even sure where to start. First of all, I should say that I was pretty much disgusted when watching that video. There was the issues surrounding common just values, manners, decency. There were issues surrounding fear. There were issues surrounding race. There were issues surrounding just abuse of power, understanding what it is that you have and just weaponizing what you have. First of all, she knew that, okay, so on the gentleman's part, there should not have been a case where you should have been pointing in front of, in that person's face. That's one of the things that I saw. So this issue would have been solved by just somebody just learning to wait. One person going before the other, somebody extending courtesy, that kind of thing. Nobody wanted to wait. That's a society that we live in. Everybody's impatient to get where they need to go. So nobody wants to wait. When somebody has to wait, then they use their privilege. I should be the one who goes first. I should be the one because I'm white. It is my right to go first. I'm a female, I'm white, I have to go first. So if I don't get to go first, then I'm going to pull out the big guns, which is to call to say that you're doing something to me. So I understand the privilege that I have. And I'm not scared to weaponize it at any time that I want to weaponize it so that I can get my way. I could also see the fear on the gentleman's part when she started to scream out, because he now understands that this could turn into a situation where I lose my life over who gets the strap in their wheelchair first. I could see the confusion from the bus driver's point of view, like, what do I do? I'm even Black myself. Nobody will believe me when the situation gets put before the public or when the police comes. There's so many things there that you don't even know where to start. But overall, the situation was just truly disgusting.
Okay. Thank you for sharing and picking up on a variety of different points that are subtle, but are so important, particularly when you're talking about some of these interchanges that could mushroom into larger, huge issues when they may start off as some slight misunderstanding, and that there was another way to try to handle that kind of situation. What's interesting also is the whole idea that they both were they both were in wheelchairs, so they're both vulnerable, and it's not like they have their full potency to do anything, and yet all of this projective stuff comes out, so thank you for sharing your views. We have Dr. Cooper, who is just joining us. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning.
All right. I did explain to people that you were teaching a class and that you would be joining us around this time.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
All right. Did we lose Kamaya? I don't see her on screen anymore. Oh, there she is. This is coming back in. Okay. Jill, what we were talking about, I had showed the video clip of the woman on the bus and was getting reactions from our panelists here about what they saw, what they experienced, and so forth. So I want to bring you into that conversation. I know I shared it with you all yesterday evening, just to and ask you all to just take a pre-look at it. So what were some of the things that came up for you as you watched that video clip?
Yeah, one of the things that came up for me is the caricatures that have been promoted in society for generations, particularly about Black people. So when we talk about anti-Blackness, there are certain characteristics that ignite fear in people, not because of any specific action that a person has exhibited, not because of anything they said, but their mere presence is a threat. It made me think of the tragic killings of a number of unarmed Black people throughout the past several years that have received high-profile attention. It made me think of the incident in New York City in Central Park, where a Black man was telling a white woman to, hey, in this park, I believe you're not supposed to have your dog off the leash or something to that effect. And the white woman hysterically called the police and made it sound like the Black man was threatening her in her life. So it's kind of like this weaponization of their whiteness. That's the first thing that came to mind, is that this woman was, in my mind, she was harassing the older Black man, who I believe he mentioned that he was a military veteran. And I think he mentioned he may have lost one of his legs in fighting for the country. And it's this kind of constant antagonism that is underneath the surface that gets projected on people. And I think it makes me think, in our society, we have to be very careful about the stereotypes and the names that we harbor when we're describing certain people. So for example, I am a Black professor who studies sport. Terms such as beast, freak, superhuman, all of these things are used to describe certain Black athletes. Oh, that athlete's a beast. Oh, they're an animal. Oh, they're this. People think those type of descriptions are harmless and they mean it to be complimentary. But in actuality, whenever you're using terms that make somebody appear to be non-human, subhuman, or superhuman, it creates a context whereby you don't provide human dignity to them. So in that case, with the woman talking to the Black man in a very hostile manner, calling him names, I found that, especially given the part of the video that we could see, that there wasn't a lot of provocation on his part. I think he may have accidentally bumped her, but I mean, he was trying to say, excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. So I think it gets us to think critically about how do we think about one another? and this goes across gender groups and across racial groups, what ways in which do we describe each other? And how do those phobias, as well as the eroticism, so the phobias and the eroticism are interconnected to me. The fetishism of certain bodies and certain people, certain ways of being, connects to various forms of exploitation and dehumanization. So I'll pause there. I'm sorry, I get excited. Dr. Ferguson, when he said that, my mind was racing, but that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting, because two of you have mentioned a couple of things that's some commonality. One has to do with the whole issue of the weaponization of whiteness and how that plays a role in how some of these interactions take place, often and at a not so conscious level. And sometimes it is conscious, like the woman you're mentioning in the park. She knew that by calling the police, that was a conscious act, and that the idea was to use some stereotypes to say a Black man is attacking me, and that really wasn't happening. And so the idea of how stereotypes enter into the picture was another thing that I was hearing as we were talking about this video, and how that gets acted out in interchanges, not only at the individual level, but when you do it at a larger systemic level, that's when it gets really problematic. This was just an individual exchange, which could have blown up into a larger thing. But now if you step back and say, how are people doing this in both subtle ways, and we call them microaggressions, subtle ways in systems, and how does that then impacts on the lived experiences of Black folk? I want to switch a little bit and ask each of you to kind of say a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of impact your growing up had on you as you were developing your perceptions around the world, about the world. So could each of you say a little word about that, your narrative story?
Yeah, definitely. It's always funny when people ask me, like, where did I grow up? Because I moved all over the place my whole life. So I always just tell people I grew up in the South, and I claim the entire South. But to expound upon that, I was born in North Carolina. I moved to Montgomery, Alabama. Gonna pause there. Moved to Montgomery, Alabama. We call it the heart of Dixieland. Then moved to Sumter, South Carolina. And in South Carolina, I spent 6th grade to 12th grade, and then moved to North Carolina for college, and now currently living in Memphis, Tennessee. So I've claimed the entire South as mine. There are many places I can go in. I'm sure, the fellow Black folks on the call is going to get this. I'm good in those areas. So, and I think that to the question around, like, how has that shaped my experience? I got to see what it's like being Black in all of those spaces in the South, and like the similarities and differences. But I did see a lot of similarities. And particularly, I do remember in Montgomery, Alabama, the things being blatant in ways that I could have never imagined. I will say, like, one of the memories I have as a kid, two memories I have from Montgomery, Alabama. One is like when we first moved there, and we moved into like sort of a predominantly white neighborhood. There was a car that almost hit us as we were walking towards our house, and they were, yelling out racial slurs, and they were like, "Get off the street, you got," and then they just like started yelling out the N-word at us and just kept going. And I remember my mother looking at me, and this is the first time like I heard her speak about, racism in this way, but she looked at us and said, "Well, welcome to Montgomery, Alabama, y'all." And like, as if, and really what that was telling me was that, welcome to the normalness that is racism in the South. Welcome to the normalness that is anti-Blackness. And that also was reintroduced to me in fourth grade when a teacher was teaching about the Ku Klux Klan. This historical lynch mob that has done all these, terrible things. And in the school, normally in school spaces, they speak of racism and they speak of white supremacists in the past as these like terrible, evil people that once existed far off in the past that aren't here anymore. And my teacher came and like told us, yeah, they still exist. I have a sister-in-law. She had a cross burned in her yard just last week. But, don't worry about that because, it's only a warning when they do that. I never forget that memory when she told us, it's just a warning, as if it was just nothing, as if the existence, the presence of them was so ingrained in the culture that it should be nothing that we blink twice at, something that we should expect. And so like these things like shaped, the way I view the world. The South did, at least the South, the United States shaped the way I view the world. And luckily, I always mention that I was blessed enough to have a grandmother who was a civil rights organizer as well as a preacher. And luckily, I got to work some of these things out with her. I got to bring my questions to her, and she never hesitated to sit down with me and struggle as long as it took to work through some of these things and to help me to unlearn what I was learning in the world, and to help me to go out and ask the right questions to the world. Those are many of the things. And I also had, he hasn't mentioned this yet, but Dr. Ferguson is my uncle. So I've also had him to have these conversations with and to work through some of these things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention in full disclosure that I told Jim, this is my grandnephew. And Jim said to me, "What's a grandnephew?" And actually, he's the son of my niece. So thanks, Nick, for being here. All right. How about you, Kamaya? What did you grow up in? What were some of your experiences that shaped how you view the world?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your story. I call myself a mutt of Boston because I have lived in every neighborhood in the city of Boston growing up. But yes, I was born and raised in Boston by two Jamaican immigrant parents. And so that kind of informed the way that I see Blackness, because when I go to school, when I go in the store, people see Black women. And so they automatically think African American. But going home, I'm seen as, okay, well, you're of Jamaican descent. This is a Jamaican household. This is family. And so I kind of grew up with both perspectives in the city, which has been very interesting because the way that Blackness is taught about, growing up, people didn't often think about there's different ways to be Black and there's different ways to exist in Black spaces. And so I kind of had to figure that out in organizing and learning and unlearning things that have been presented to me. From a young age, it was instilled in me that I was Black. I was a Black woman. So I wasn't one of those people who kind of had an incident one day and had to go home and be like, what is this? Like from the moment I could talk, like, you're a Black woman, people are going to come for you. So you always have to work twice as hard, just to be 3 times as good, just to be 4 times always in the room. You always got to make sure that you're on top of it. So, because no one's going to be on top of it for you. But one of the distinct memories that I have is I believe I was in 6th grade. And I was going to a school in Roxbury, Massachusetts, if anyone doesn't know where that is, but it's in Boston. It's a neighborhood in Boston. And I was going to a charter school at the time. And we all wore uniform. Like that was just the dress code for the school. Khaki pants, navy blue vest, the baby bell shirts, all dressed up, ready to go. And I was on my way home. And I had one of my classmates. He was at the time, 7th grade. He was a grade above me. And so we had to stay after school for a project that we were working on. We were in the same enrichment program. And because we both live in the same neighborhood, you know, he offered to walk me home. So I didn't have to walk home by myself because I'm young, you know, neighborhood's not necessarily the best. And so he's walking me to the bus station, and out of nowhere, 2 police officers come and they grab him and they put him against the gate. And so I'm just extremely scared because I'm like, what did we do? I don't understand what's happening. We literally just came from school. Mind you, at this point, he can't be more than 12 years old. He just happens to be tall. And me, myself, I'm only like 10. So I'm also no idea what to do in this situation. And they're like, oh, where are you coming from? You know, what were you doing? And we're like, we just came from school. You can look at us. We're in our gym uniform. Like it says the school that we go to. And they're like, you stop talking. And they basically call it on the radio saying like, what's the description? And what happened is that they were looking for someone who committed a crime about 30 minutes earlier and who ran from the scene. And so they assumed because of his height that it was him. However, the description that they were looking for was not even a Black person. It was a white man. It's just because they seen him coming in the neighborhood that we were in, they automatically stopped and said, you know, we could just, you know, they gather up a whole bunch of perps that meet the description, and then they'll go forward and they'll choose, you know, who did the crime. But he wasn't more than 12 years old. And so that always stuck with me because seeing him cry on the fence as a young child, I know that situations like that, a lot of times our young Black men and young Black women have to go through. And those are the situations that stick with them and make them internalize that I am an inferior, which in fact, that's not the case. So when we talk about race, it's not always just, oh, you're an N-word or you're this. There are other systemic ways to oppress people based on the color of their skin, and the way that it's been enriched and ingrained into our society and into our daily interactions, with people who are meant to protect us, with people who are meant to teach us, with people who are meant to save our lives. And so these daily encounters kind of really change your way of thinking. And it's kind of hard to break out of it if it continuously happens to you. But that was one of the earlier situations where I experienced race and I kind of internalized like, wow, will my family be telling me it's real? So I have to be out there.
So you got validation for what your mom and dad were talking about. Right. How about you, Keisha? Where'd you grow up and what were some of your experiences that helped shaped how you view the world?
So I am from the Caribbean, Jamaica specifically. And I will tell you that being Black in both spaces is totally different. There is, so living in this space, living in America, I am perceived as African American until I open my mouth. So I'm exposed to all the things that African Americans are exposed to. But then there's a tolerance when my accent comes out. So I'm not perceived the same way. So the things that I dealt with in Jamaica was more colorism. So when I came here, it was different. It was surprising. I was taken aback. It was, for moments I had to stop and think, what just happened? Because I didn't grow up with this kind of stuff. I didn't grow up being exposed to being judged basically on my complexion, you know, not the same way. So it's totally different. There are experiences that I have here that sometimes I have to think back. Was that racism? Was that something else? That's not the first thing that comes to mind as well. When you come here and you experience those things, you're wondering, did I do something wrong? Did I not have enough manners? Was I impatient? Did somebody get me wrong? The last thing that comes to mind when you're from another island, another country, coming in as a Black person is not race. It's something that you have to come into America and you have to learn that this is a part of what's going on here and this is how you're perceived. So I will tell you that being Black in Jamaica and being Black in America is two different things. There is almost no overlap.
It's an important perspective to bring to the conversation in the sense that there's not a monolithic experience for what it really means to be Black. And there's not a monolithic experience for where you are in the world, being Black. And so if you grow up in an entirely Black community, for example, I actually grew up in an entirely Black community, but was in the United States. But then once I stepped outside of that community, that's when I began to experience issues having to do with racism, which is very different than growing up in Jamaica, where you're surrounded with the same coloration of folks, and it's not the same kind of issue. And then
There's
the
more
moment
tolerance, Professor.
beg pardon?
There's more tolerance for Blacks coming in from other countries than there is for African Americans. We are exposed to similar things, but as I said, when you open your mouth, you're almost given a pass, if that makes any sense. Like, you're not held to the same kind of what is the word? Expectations. You're not judged the same way as an African American. It's so totally different.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. That is, the linguistics, the intersection between the linguistics and how we actually hear one another intersects with how we actually perceived skin color. And there's a difference, at least in the United States, as to how that happens. So thank you for sharing that. That's an important perspective. How about you, Dr. Cooper? Where'd you grow up in?
Yeah, I mean, I just hearing everybody's perspectives, I just see connections with all of them. So I was born, as Nick mentioned, I'm from the Southeastern United States. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, where Nick is right now. So very well familiar with Memphis and its history. And then I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which for those who don't know is arguably considered the birthplace of the civil rights sit-in movement. There were 4 African-American students at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, which is right now in 2022, the largest historically Black college and university in terms of student enrollment in the country. My mother grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina during the early civil rights era. So she came of age right after Brown v. Board of Education was passed. My father, similar to how Keisha and Kamaya were talking about kind of looking at Blackness in the African diaspora, my father grew up in Liberia, West Africa, in Monrovia. And for those who aren't familiar with the history of Liberia, as a country, it was founded largely due to the migration of formerly enslaved people of African descent in the United States through the American Colonization Society. And then there were Africans in that area who were already living there. And even to this day, there's quite a bit of tension, even though it's improved tremendously. But to Keisha's point, the way that Blackness is viewed and treated, definitely there is some nationalism, there's some tribalism, and the way that not only white people, but those of Asian descent, those of Native American descent, those of Latino, Latina, Latinx descent, the way in which they engage with Black people across different cultural and ethnic backgrounds is very different. So growing up, whenever I would go with my Liberian family, similar to Keisha and Kamaya, it was almost like they're experiencing their Jamaican culture. Like, we're all Black, everybody's eating palm butter and rice. We're talking, with these accents, we're dancing to this music. This is the culture, is all Black. And the distinctions that we made amongst each other had nothing really to do with race at all. There were other differences that were highlighted. Oh, you grew up in this part of Monrovia. Oh, you went to this school, you did that. However, on my mom's side, her growing up in North Carolina as a former Confederate state, as Nick mentioned, around the Ku Klux Klan, last year during the Black Lives Matter protests in the pandemic, the town right next to where I grew up, Graham, North Carolina, there was a Ku Klux Klan rally. When I was in college at Chapel Hill, there was a Ku Klux Klan rally in Raleigh, North Carolina at the state capitol. And this is pre-Black Lives Matter movement. I can name every era of my life from childhood to adolescence to adulthood where I have been accused or accosted by a police officer of either stealing something or being a criminal. Kamaya's story about her friend, about that happening, when she was younger. I'll give two quick examples. When I was a child, as an elementary school student, my mother took us to Payless Shoes. And I'll never forget it because I have a negative association with Payless Shoes because of this incident. We were in there trying shoes. Evidently, someone had taken some shoes and put them in a ashtray. Back then, you could still smoke inside of stores. And my mom and I were going to leave to check out, and the person at the desk said, "Your son put those shoes in that ashtray. We think he's trying to steal these shoes." And I'm looking at my mom like, I don't know what they're talking about. I saw the person who put the shoes in there, but I was nowhere near them. So that was from a child, this idea that as a Black boy, I have a particular vulnerability in this society where I'm always guilty until proven innocent. Fast forward to last year here in Boston, which is, from what I was told, the birthplace of the American Revolution, the progressive North, the Union, all of the integration. I'm driving my two daughters to the park, and I have two police officers pull me over and say that someone in the neighborhood called and said I fit the description of someone who had been stealing Amazon packages. So fast forward. So this is close to a 40-year difference between being a boy in a Payless shoe store in Greensboro, North Carolina, and being a grown man with two daughters driving in Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts specifically, in the same type of projection of criminality of you're a threat, of your violation, continues till this day. So growing up in the South, as Nick mentioned, you don't have the luxury of thinking about people being equal. You don't have the luxury of thinking that Black people have a privilege. You don't have a luxury of thinking that your life is guaranteed. What you do have is a direct, immediate, intense confrontation with racism, and that is incumbent upon you to develop a level of social political consciousness, not only for the betterment of our people, but for your own survival. So when you look at people who engage in different types of activism and people who say certain things, I always remember growing up in the South, certain people can say certain things and do certain things in certain spaces that every one of us can't do. Like, for me as a Black male, to lose my temper and to do something in certain ways could mean that it cost me my life. Because I've seen other people who had their lives taken from them, who have been incarcerated unjustly, who have been killed unjustly, and they were mild-mannered. So I know for me, there's a particular type of vulnerability that came with growing up in the South and thinking about Blackness, as Kamaya and Keisha talked about. How do we account for Blackness in different spaces? How do we protect each other when some of us are in all Black spaces, whether it be in Liberia, Jamaica, etc., that no doubt the anti-Blackness is still prevalent there due to colonization and other factors. But then how do you help us who we have to live in spaces and work in spaces where most of the people are not Black, and we're dealing with those dynamics? So that's how it influenced my development.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing the ways in which where you grew up and the ways in which it's impacted some experiences that impacted the way you began to view the world. Which leads me actually to a secondary question that often is asked when we're on doing these kinds of panels. But I want to put it out there just to see what I'm calling you all the young voices because I'm like the elder here. To see what your responses are. And it's like based on now what your lived experiences have been up to this point. Have you seen any progress as it pertains to race relations? And if so, how do you see that progress? If not, why? There is no progress. Or if it's a yes and no, why do you say yes and no? So who wants to take that on?
I would like to say that it depends on what your view of progress is, like how you measure progress. Some people see progress as, for example, the integration of schools. This was a progress to allow access to education for Black voices, for Black youth. Progress also has been more representation in politics, in medicine, in health, in different fields. However, to me personally, racism knows how to manifest itself. And like every generation that passes, it knows how to reform and revamp so that it can still survive in the new environment that's being taken place. So with that being said, I guess to make it more simple, for example, with voting, right now with the past presidential election, it took at least the United States in a world spin, because it was like, who is going to take after Donald Trump? We have to fix this. We have to reverse all of the damage that has been done. And so everyone was saying, get out and vote. Black people kind of galvanized together and said, you know, we have to be the ones to change this. We need representation. We need representation. The representation did not come with Mr. Biden, but you know, he was an okay choice for what we had. However, the progress that he promised has not been delivered. He promised cancellation of student loan debt. I have not seen $1 given back to me. He promised to nominate the first Black woman to the Supreme Court justice. He did follow through on that promise with Miss Ketanji Brown Jackson. However, there hasn't been any other developments for Black people in this country. They recently just passed a bill about daylight savings time, yet we're waiting on police reform. We're waiting on voting reform, actual legislation that will help build up the Black experience and give justice and reparations back to Black communities. And that legislation cannot be passed yet. That's my form of progress policy. That's how I see it. How are the ways that we can make Black people's lives better, and how will it be instilled in the institution that is the United States of America? How is it that we can get into the laws to allow Black people access to these spaces, to allow them access to resources? Because right now what I see is that it's a lot of independent organizations, grassroots organizations serving resources and needs to communities rather than the actual government. And following through on their promise to represent people, even though we get out every November and we vote and we put them in these seats. So to me, progress is policy, and investing in policy and investing in representation for people who write that, so that they can help us come and be better.
Okay, Kamaya, wisdom from the youth. All right.
Yeah.
Nick wanted to. Okay.
A large part of my identity is like was shaped by, like, you know, the conversations and the wisdom that was shared to me from my grandmother. So I'm gonna quote one of the things that she's written down in the article before, but one of the things this made me think of, Kamaya made me think of this. One of the things that she wrote down, and I think I'm quoting it word for word, where she said, white races do not wear white sheets, they write on them. And she said, from policies to editorials, they write on them. And she said, following that, she said issues of race have been juxtaposed. And she said, whites only signs have been turned into whites only interpretations of racial realities. I personally, from my own lens of the world, I personally think that the entire notion of progress is given to us through a white lens. I believe that, and I wrote this down wrote it down in 2 words and I crossed out one, but I think that I haven't seen as much progress as I've seen performance. And that's like, if you look out throughout the decades, and personally, another thing, full disclosure, I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe in reform. I think that that when incremental changes are made to a structure, in the with the intent to make it better, make it inherently evil structure better, I think that it serves to make more permanent that structure versus it serving to change the material conditions of people. So that's looking at police reform, that's looking at prison reform. Like these are the ways that they can funnel more money into those institutions and less money out of the Black communities that need it, right? More resources toward here and less resources toward there. And this is why I was really really down for the defund the police movement. I think, like, and I know a lot of people feel a lot of ways about these, but like essentially defunding towards abolition is the idea of shifting resources. And this is also something that's not foreign to the United States. We defund schools every year. We defund Black communities every year. This is not something that's new. Actually, you mentioned Biden, Kamaya mentioned Biden, and how, like, there's been a failure to uphold the promises that he's made. And then, like, the same token, there has been like follow through in increasing the military budget by $31 million. There's like increasing ICE's budget, like by like 8%. So like this, there's another notion that says, we don't have the money for it. And the reality is that we don't have the moral capacity for it. That like budgets are moral documents, and that, I think that what is being told to us is that we will spend your money, because that's what's really happening. I hope everybody on this call knows that you pay taxes. If you live in the United States, you pay taxes to the United States, and that money is being spent on things that have nothing to do with you and your well-being. And I think that one of the things that should be brought up when we think about healing racial linked wounds is thinking about the ways that our oppressions are linked in these different ways, right? Like, Dr. Barber says this brilliantly all the time. I'm Black and you white, but we both poor. And when the lights get turned off, we both Black. So, like thinking about the ways that like we're all being robbed. Like everybody is being duped right now. And in that, it's like the performance, and we see it. It's not nothing that's like hard to see. We see the jig. It's right in front of our eyes. And so, yeah, I think that's the question was, do we see progress? I see performance. I saw Black people in the summertime in the streets. I saw them burn down a police precinct, and, an uprising happen in the wake of 2020. And then I saw the response being kneeling in kente cloths and a Black Lives Matter avenue, none of which nobody asked for. So I think that the response is always performance. The response is always, what Dr. King liked to call the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, which is, maybe one day down the road, sometime, if you vote the next election, you may see a few more cents in your pocket. I think that that's what we see. That's what we need to critically think about, and also take steps in action to disrupt.
Urgency of now. Oh. Right. Thank you, Nick, for your thoughts around that. How about you, Keisha? You see any progress or not?
Not enough. As Kamaya said, there are definitely, as it pertains to voting rights and integration in terms of schools and all of that, yes, there has been progress. But as Nick said, just it's a performance. It's not enough. It's just enough to keep Blacks happy. It's just enough to say that we're working on it, but it's not enough for where we are. If you think about the previous generation, or reading, looking at videos, hearing about stories, the same things that were affecting that generation then is still affecting this generation now. So typically, if you really look at it, there has been little to no progress, really no progress. There's still fear. Fear is out the roof. I mentioned earlier that being Black in Jamaica is different from being Black in America. There's a fear that's associated with being Black in America. I can lose my life. You know, if I don't open my mouth, if I don't get that little pass, if I don't get that tolerance, I can lose my life. Versus in Jamaica, being Black, as Dr. Cooper said, you know, we have other issues, but it's not the same issues that you face as in being Black here. You know, we're thinking about what are some of the things that we could look at. It's just, there's just a fear that is attached to being Black here. You're just worried about, am I going to lose my life? Is somebody going to misunderstand what I'm saying? Is this enough for the police to come and shoot first and then ask question later, that kind of thing. So there has been progress, definitely, but the progress is just, it's just to placate Black people. It's just to say, oh, we're working on it. Your issues are serious, but really and truly under all of that, I don't think they take it seriously enough.
How about you, Dr. Cooper? Thank you so much, Keisha.
Yeah, man, just echoing the sentiments that have already been expressed. There are a couple of quotes that come to mind. Malcolm X had a quote, and I know Ta-Nehisi Coates has used it and paraphrased it, but it's almost as if, you know, if you stab us in the back, you know, and you put a knife in our back, 10 inches, and you pull it out, or you pull it back 1 inch, by definition, there's some progress, right? Like it's no longer 10 inches in, but it's 9 inches, and you still have the knife in our back. So, when I think about our ancestors and what they endured, in terms of forced enslavement, raping, dehumanization, and then we fast forward to the modern day mass incarceration complex, miseducation, continued sexual trafficking and sexual abuse of our young boys and girls and those who are non-gender binary conforming. It's hard to assess what, if any, progress has been made. If we're looking at the racial wealth gap, no, we're still very much economically exploited. But as Nick alluded to, part of that conversation is around the global implementation of capitalism. And the idea that what does progress look like for any group of people, let alone Black people, in a capitalist system that is inherently exploitative, where small groups of people can control massive amounts of wealth. I saw one study that said the 5 wealthiest families in the United States own more than 50% of the US population combined. I don't view any form of system like that to be progress. I find that to be, inhumane in many ways, that exists. Now, in terms of some progress that I do think is happening, there have been several African countries, including Ghana and a number of others over the course of the 20th century that gained their independence from previous colonizers. And no doubt there's still a lot of work to be done internally as well as externally, but I think that's progress. I mean, even the infusion or the amplification of theories such as anti-Blackness and Black crit, Black feminist thought, womanism, and a number of other ways of thinking, being, and doing that are gaining traction and gaining consciousness. And I think even just the Black Lives Matter movement in and of itself, unfortunately, the tragedies that sparked those movements are not progress, but the fact that there was a global movement that generated more awareness and more concerted action for change. So the resilience of our people has been prominent throughout generations. And I do believe that, we are moving towards a better world. Now, what that may mean and what that may look like, I don't know. Because if you look at Afro-pessimists like Frank Wilderson, he would say that the end of the world literally is kind of what that would look like. And so for me, I think it's a matter of continuing to heighten our consciousness, heighten our collective action, heighten our holistic wellness, being very clear on what we're challenging as a people, what do we accept and what we're not going to accept. As Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without demands. It never has, it never will. And the limits of tyrants are prescribed by those who they oppress. So once we get to a point where there's certain non-negotiables in terms of what we're going to engage in and what we're not, I think some of these groups or the powers that be are going to continue to promote the current status quo because they benefit from it. Because Kamaya and Keisha brought up a very, very important point. We're asking people who benefit quite well from the status quo to have a moral appeal to our plight. Throughout history, that just doesn't show that that actually has worked. So at some point, there has to be another strategy of pressure, another strategy of making a certain outcome happen. Because if it was great based on morality, we wouldn't be in the current state that we're in right now. I think the reality is there are a lot of people who are not Black and many who are Black who are not that uncomfortable with the status quo. Everybody isn't enraged like everyone on this panel is. From hearing Nick, Keisha, and Kamaya talk, I think all of us are deeply upset about the status quo and what our Black people across the African diaspora are experiencing. But I think from hearing everyone on the panel talk, including thinking myself, we all know people in our communities and in our families who don't feel the same way we do. So, you know, I think the challenge is very monumental, but I also believe we draw strength from our ancestors who are still with us, I believe, are still with us in spirit and in truth. And I think we just have to continue to push forward in the struggle that must be, to quote Dr. Harry Edwards.
Oh, powerful words from all of you. I wish we had a lot more time because we could go into a lot more detail around different things. We actually literally have about 3 minutes left, technically. And I wanted to ask that miracle question that I think I asked you all last night, but we may not have enough time to get into that. But I'll throw it out there, and if anybody wants to make a comment, they can. And the miracle question, again, because of where we happen to be right now, is that if you were to awake after a night's sleep and a miracle had occurred, which made race-linked or human problems in relationship to the Black or underserved communities disappear without you having been aware that the miracle had taken place, what would you first notice upon waking up? That's a miracle.
And I'm gonna circle right back to that Frank B. Wilderson uplift that you brought up. And I because when I think of this, I can't conceptualize that in my head. So you know, when you brought that up, I'm like, the first thought I had was, oh, you know, the first thing I'll notice is that the world has ended. Because what is this world with not linked to anti-Blackness? And so yeah, that's the first thing that I thought of. But like, I don't know, like I think that and I'm gonna stop right here, but like I think that one of the things that was robbed from us, amongst many things, our bodies, our dignity and everything, but was also like our ability to dream of a context beyond this one. And I think that that's one of the things that we should lean most heavily to, of like, what is it, what world do you dream of beyond this one, where anti-Blackness doesn't, you know, reign supreme. So yeah.
But I'm gonna reframe a little bit of that, the world ending, to the world in complete transformation. Okay. Anybody else want to share a thought before I bring Jim back in? If not, Jim, you want to join us?
I'd really love to hear what the others think about that question. Cuff, Keisha, Kamaya, Joe, anything you want to add? This has been so deep and so rich. It's been
I think
incredible.
I'm sorry, Doc. I'm so sorry. I thought you were asking me a question directly. I think one of the things that would be evident would just be the look of the place. Just the divisions that are in the communities that are evident, as in one community looking different from the other. That would be one of the noticeable changes, I think, that would be obvious. You know, you wouldn't have one community looking so much different from another community. You would have more integration in terms of whites living beside blacks. These places that we'd be frequenting would not so much cater to one population or one race per se, but it would be, you know, the supermarkets that you go to, they would be mixed. They would be the hospitals, the community centers, all of these places, you would see more of a togetherness between the different races. I think that without being told that anything had changed. Think about our reality right now. When you go to certain areas, you're expecting only to see a particular race. When you go to other areas, another race. But one of the things that would be evident if I wasn't aware that a miracle or anything had changed would be just seeing togetherness in terms of look, people hanging out together, doing stuff together. There would be no division between the races. It wouldn't be the black race over here, the white race over here, the very look of the community, the resources that are available in the community. It would just be equal right across the board. That's what I think would be one big indication that there had been some change.
Equity, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Kamaya, do you have anything?
I honestly, I did have to ponder it a bit because I admit when you asked that question, my mind went blank for the first time this entire panel, because I was like, what in the world could that even mean? What could it even mean? How would our environment sustain itself? Because I feel like a lot of the systems that we are integrated in thrive off of oppression, off of the oppression of Black people. And so if it doesn't exist, then how would we even operate? How would we function as a society? But I guess if I wanted to be funny, I would say that it would exist in the spaces of the Senate. They could actually sit and talk to each other and get work done. And, you know, communicate and talk to each other like human beings and say, you know, this actually would hurt people. This actually is taking funding away from a group that needs it. And seeing that that makes sense and that's okay to say, you know, we're going to stand up for our citizens. That's what I would say. If we woke up and there was a miracle and we didn't realize it, we could actually get things done.
Would that we had a Senate like that, huh?
I think you need to run, Kamaya.
I was talking about that last night in class, and I was telling people, and Kamaya, both Kamaya and Keisha were in the class, and I said something to the effect that one day you all may have to run, you know, for these offices. So we're in sync around that. All right. Joe, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to what everyone else has said. Once again, Dr. Ferguson, thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you, Keisha, Kamaya, Nick, for your inspiring existence. I'm not even going to say your words, like you all embody what that miracle will look like. Like the fact that you all are here, breathing, living, and carrying out your purposes is inspiring beyond words. In terms of what it would look like to me, building on what Nick said, for me, it would just be a radical transformation and really a demolition of the capitalist and settler colonial states. And it would be a return to a collectivism whereby land isn't owned by any one group of people. There's enough water and food to feed everybody on earth 1 million times over, and I know I'm exaggerating, but several times over, and yet people are starving. So it would be a place where there was a common humanity, whereby cultural differences would be acknowledged and celebrated and not stigmatized, marginalized, penalized, and erased. There would be a retrieval of all of our histories, her stories and queer stories, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And there would be a place where we learn from it and we grow as a humanity. We learn how to respect each other. We learn how to respect the environment. We figure out ways where the problem is, how do we make humanity and the environment better, not how do we dominate other groups of people, or not how do we acquire materialistic wealth. The notion of materialism would no longer exist. There wouldn't be a place for it. Like, that would not be what's valued in currency. It would be more about relationships. It would be more about the quality of life that everyone has. And the idea that no matter what position you have in society, there's an obligation to empower and uplift the most vulnerable. So the notion of, oh, I'm good, I'm privileged, doesn't exist, because if there are vulnerable people in our society, then we're all vulnerable. So I think to get to that path, it is going to be a radical transformation. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that means that things will get a lot worse before they get better, in my opinion. And I think, we look at these regimes throughout human history, herstory, and queerstory, they don't come crumbling down just in a pleasant, enjoyable manner. There's usually either a catastrophic event or a series of major shifts in the earth, in the world, that cause these things to fracture, which is why our ongoing resistance and persistence is important, because what we're doing is, I believe, and I'm a spiritual person, I believe the reverberations of what we're doing are contributing to that fracturing of this world, of this system of oppression, and is contributing to the manifestation of that better humanity, of that radical transformation. So it's like, for me, I feel it in my spirit that we're doing that. It's taking a while, and we don't know, just like our ancestors, Ida B. Wells Barnett, she fought for anti-lynching bills throughout her lifetime to the core, and the United States still doesn't have anti-lynching. So what I tell our students, and what I tell anyone who's willing to listen, are you willing to fight and die for something, even if you won't see it in your lifetime? And I certainly am. So I'm going to pursue as hard as I can for that better humanity and radical transformation, and believe that those who come after us will amplify and build on what we've done. And eventually this system will come down. Nothing, at least in my mind, nothing evil lasts forever. And at some point, everybody and everything will have to give an account for what has been done on this earth. So that's just my answer to that question.
I have to mirror back a little bit. I saw this little comment in the chat here about you, Coop. It said, "I'll vote for you, Dr. Cooper."
I'm not right. Kamaya's got to be the one running for office. I'm not dealing with the politics. I'm not. I don't know if they want me in office, because whatever you may think you like about the current, it's going to be a whole different ball game if I get in office. So you might not want me in office, but I will support.
I'm bringing light and fluid with me to the Senate House.
We got to start a draft.
We're going to change the whole thing.
Cuff, tell us a little bit about tomorrow before
Sure.
we bring this to a close.
Yes. So tomorrow, and before I say anything, I just wanted to thank all of the panelists here for your wisdom, the wisdom of the young voices rising to carry on the fight, to carry on the struggle, to carry on the transformation that's so sorely needed as we begin to, as a human species, come to grips in this reckoning period. So it's important to have the voices there, and you did a wonderful job in echoing the sentiments, I think, of a lot of youth, young voices, and I'm speaking right now just as an elder. So tomorrow, what we're going to try to do, what we will be doing, is turning our attention and going a little bit deeper So, and it piggybacks a little bit on where we're ending today, which has to do with tomorrow, what we're going to be doing, looking at the soul and soulic experiences that filters into this transformation and how to play the human race game anew. And we're also going to see if we can bring in the feminine voice into the conversation. So we have three wonderful women who, a couple of whom are returning to talk about their ideas and their thoughts about playing the human race game anew from a spiritual and soul-centered perspective. So that's what we have on the venue for tomorrow.
Thank you, Cuff. Nick, Kamaya, Akeisha, this has been brilliant. This has been brilliant. And it has inspired me. I've been struck by the depth of your realism, but just the fact that you're here, just the fact that you embody so much courage and authenticity, I would say, is inspiring in and of itself. So I just really want to thank you for being who you are. Thank you, Cuff, for convening these sessions. You do such an extraordinary job every time. Deeply appreciate it. And that'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all invited to the after chat session. You'll see the link in the chat box. And we'll see you all again here tomorrow, same time, same station, for the third session of our 5-day program on humanity reckoning with its racial wounds. Bye for now.
Thank you for having us. I appreciated it.
We want you to run. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the Senate, Kamaya.
I told her that last night. She's gonna run at some point.
I appreciate the sentiments. It will take time. There's a plan in place. It will take time.
Good. Just let us know how we can support.